Okay, we are live. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Mike Doherty. I'm the digital editor at PT Digger, and you are watching the latest in our FAQ Live series. This is a series of events that we've been holding throughout the pandemic to help answer your questions about COVID-19 with the help of local experts around Vermont. And our topic tonight is the children's COVID vaccine. About 1 week ago, the CDC authorized the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for use in kids ages 5 to 11. And the response in Vermont so far has been strong. Governor Phil Scott said yesterday that about 14,000 children had been signed up for appointments. That's about a third of the eligible population. Officials have said that's around 44,000 kids. Today was the first day the health department released data on how many children had actually received their shots in the past few days that they've been available. That number was about 1,300, or about 3% of that age group. At the same time, experts have warned that there may be more hesitancy among this group than we've seen among other age groups. Parents are naturally protective of their kids, and national survey data has shown that about 2/3 of parents in this age group say they're not planning to sign their kids up right away. At VT Digger, we've been collecting your questions about the children's vaccine over the past 2 weeks. And tonight we're hoping to respond to some of the concerns that have been raised. And to do that, we've enlisted the help of Dr. Judy Orton. Judy is a pediatrician in Bennington. She's practiced in Vermont for about 30 years. Today, she runs Green Mountain Pediatrics and also practices at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center, where she was previously the chair of the Pediatrics department. And we're thrilled to have her here tonight to talk to us about the children's COVID vaccine. So Judy, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I've got to ask, what's it like to be a pediatrician in this moment? What's the mood in your office right now?
We were excited a year ago when adult vaccines were coming into play, and couldn't wait for those to come out so that not only ourselves and our families, but the adults in the state could get vaccinated. Excitement built when adolescents came out, and it's been all summer that we've been kind of waiting with bated breath of when are they going to release it? When's the data going to be ready? Is it going to be good data? So it's been, pretty exciting time in the fall, and with, essentially every single encounter with parents of children in this age group, they've been asking when, and even the kids have been asking, when can I get it? So it's exciting that it finally got approved. Now we're just, we're waiting so that we can actually have it in our office to deliver it that way too.
Got it. Yeah, so we'll be digging into that a little bit of what the logistics here actually look like. First, I just want to give a quick run through of how this is going to work. So we've got about a half hour. We're going to go until around 6:30, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can in that time. A lot of these have been submitted ahead of time, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can feel free to use the live chat function there to submit any questions, and we'll see if we were able to get to them in the time that we have. But Judy, I wanted to start with just a broad question that seems to be kind of underpinning all of the questions that we've heard so far, just sort of the common thread here, which is this vaccine safe for 5 to 11-year-olds? And how do we know that?
So, yes, absolutely, it is safe. Children's immune system is not any different than a 12 to 25-year-old immune system. In fact, it's probably more robust and can respond better. We have a lot of data from the 12 to 25 group, as well as the older adults. This has probably been the most well-studied and most followed up vaccine in history of vaccines, and probably the most public about that too. So we have a lot of data to go by. The studies have been ongoing. So it's, just because the vaccine, many parents are worried that it got released too soon, and even for themselves. But the technology for this vaccine has been in the works for, 20 years. So the child data was looking at, one, did the children build an immune response? And that was absolutely yes. Then the next step was, what's the correct dose for them? Because they're just not, little adults. So though their immune system functions the same way, we knew that probably there's going to be a dose difference. So the next parts of that study was looking to see what the correct dose, best dose was going to be to cause the best protection with the least amount of side effects. And so we have good data on that. Was there millions of children studied? Absolutely not. But there was enough to be able to come to really good scientific conclusions with the numbers that were studied. In fact, children at the most common is pain at the injection site, which is no different than any other vaccine. And rarely did they get side effects such as a fever or a headache that is a little bit more common in the adult population. So they have fared very well. The adults for Pfizer would get 30 micrograms, determined that the kids only need 10 micrograms. It will be 2 doses, ideally at least 3 weeks apart. I know with the first rollout, some of the parents have had some angst because the 3rd week hits on Thanksgiving. So there's not any clinics going. So they have to be delayed just a few more days before they can get their 2nd dose. That's okay, to be delayed. It just, we can't give it too early.
Got it. That all makes sense. I wonder, so can you, we did get one question from Linda in Essex asking about the 2-shot regimen, and why is it that this needs to be a 2-shot vaccine? Why do children need to come back after they've gotten that first dose and get that 2nd one?
The first dose primes the immune system. So again, this vaccine the mRNA doesn't stay in our bodies for long. It is the blueprint. Think of it as the instruction manual for putting together the children's toys on Christmas Eve. And our body reads those instructions a whole lot better than we read those instructions to put those toys together. So it gives them the information for that blueprint to make the antibodies. But the booster doses then just increases the robustness of the response so that it gets it up into that 90% range. Invariably, off the top of my head, I can't recall any vaccine other than way back when smallpox, which isn't even given anymore, have only been a single dose. Every single vaccine in our arsenal have at least 1 booster dose, if not several. And again, it's just to prime the immune system. It depends on the age of the child too, of how many. The first season a child under 10 gets influenza, they need 2 doses to prime. After that, it's just a single dose.
A lot of this speaks to kind of the how of vaccinating children. And we've also got a number of questions about why. One of them, Deb from Essex, Deb writes, COVID is not a childhood disease. In fact, the numbers of children who have died from COVID is minuscule compared to some other diseases. Why would we put our children at risk for the potential and unknown side effects from the COVID vaccine, especially when they have less risk from contracting COVID?
So they don't have less risk of contracting the disease. They can still get it. They can still spread it. They have less risk for the major side effects and consequences compared to, say, our elderly population, but it still happens. We don't expect children in that 5 to 11 group to die. They're not supposed to die. COVID is still the 8th leading cause of death in the 5 to 11 group. So that, lends some perspective. Have there been many deaths? No, but 1 death is 1 too many. The vaccine has not caused any deaths. We can't predict who is going to be a long hauler, who is going to have long-term consequences, who might get pneumonia and need oxygen, or even, worse, be in the ICU and be intubated. We don't know who might get the multi-system inflammatory disease, the MIS-C. It happens, and vaccines can prevent a good share of those. So kind of my question back is, why wouldn't you do this? The other advantage is, if you've boosted the child's immune system, you've given them the blueprint to respond, because it's in our nature. We want to protect our children and do the best and prepare them for being healthy adults. So that's what this vaccine does. It prepares our immune system to fight this off, maybe prevent it entirely, or certainly give it mild disease. I have a teenager who is now a year and a half out from asymptomatic COVID. She still does not have taste or smell. She had asymptomatic COVID. Why should she have lost her taste or smell? That's the beast of this virus, is that it's pretty unpredictable. Protecting with the vaccine is much more predictable, and certainly is definitely is safe.
I want to ask more broadly, because we've gotten just a range of questions about this that suggest this possibility of future unknown side effects or long-term effects. And I wonder, what's generally your response when you've got parents in your clinic who come to you and are saying, that they feel like we just don't know right now because the vaccine is relatively new. What do you tell those parents? What is kind of the general response to this idea that there might be unknowns that just we haven't had time to study yet?
So we have a 60 plus year track record with vaccines in general and how our immune system responds. So this vaccine, again, isn't any different than all the other childhood vaccines and vaccines we get as adults to help the immune system memory. In the history of vaccines, there's never been any long-term consequences past about 8 weeks. So we definitely have 8 weeks of history. We have longer than that in these studies to know of any long-term consequences from the vaccine itself. So I can say with 100% confidence that that there isn't any long-term consequences from having the vaccine. Short-term consequences, they might be a little fussy. They might complain of arm soreness. They might get a headache or a fever. 99% of them, once they get through the, sometimes what I call to parents, the drama of having the shot. And, some kids are extremely fearful. We do our best and try to approach it in a matter of fact way and hurry up and get it over with. And even those kids who kind of give me a hard time, at the end they go, "Oh, that was it." And we laugh together and yep. I said, the worry about it is much worse than the actual getting the shot. So truly, long-term side effects from the vaccine just is not going to happen.
There are two specific things that seem to have come up over and over again in these types of questions. And one is myocarditis, a kind of heart inflammation, and the other is mast cell activation system, MCAS. Can you speak to what those two complications are and why those seem to be coming up in conversation around this?
So both of those things can happen with COVID disease. As with any vaccine, some of the side effects of vaccines is it simulates the disease. For instance, a 12-month-old gets the measles, mumps, rubella. Potentially a week to 10 days later, they may get a fever and a measly type rash that just shows that the immune system was responding. They get over it and are back to normal with normal skin within a couple days. So the myocarditis and MIS-C certainly can happen with COVID. That's one of the things that's worrisome. It's more common in teenage boys. And with the rollout of the 12 to 17 group, there have been some instances of mild myocarditis after the second dose in boys. It doesn't seem to affect the girls. At the most, it was like an overnight stay in the hospital and complete recovery. It was more of a scare than anything else. And, certainly if you're the one going through it, you're the family going through it, it can be pretty scary. But all of these boys have recovered. What's more scary to me, dealing with, adolescents, young adults. I take care of college age kids, and they go off to play sports. They're playing sports in high school, they're playing sports in college. Is that we've had some athletes over this past year have contracted COVID, gone out onto the practice field with unknown myocarditis, and had sudden death. So there is a protocol in place, and has been for well over a year, that any child, teenager with COVID has to come back in, or certainly be screened, teleconference, telemedicine, depending on the age, for myocarditis. We have a series of questions. They may need a physical exam. They may need an EKG. I've had one in my practice that needed to go see the cardiologist because the EKG was abnormal, just to make sure that is okay for them to go back to practice and start being physically active. In fact, one of our instructions when they get COVID, even if it's asymptomatic, you have to be home and isolating anyways, but you're not to go outside and play and run around and get all heated up. It's quiet activities, because your heart and lungs need all they can do to combat the virus and not be strained, because we don't know what the virus might be doing to the heart and lungs at that point.
It sounds like what I'm hearing from you is that these risks are really more associated with the disease, with actually getting COVID, than they are with the vaccine.
Correct. They can happen with a vaccine, more commonly in the 12 to 17-year-old group. But common is this: it's 1 in 10,000 that might have an ER visit or an overnight stay and complete recovery. They did some scientific modeling for the 5 to 11 group, and looking, before that, the vaccine was even released. And one of the questions was, is this vaccine the right thing to do for a child? And they looked at the risk benefits. And that was one of the things that they looked at, was the myocarditis, and the risk of anything from the vaccine and the immediacy of the vaccine in that 5 to 11 is less than the 1 in 10,000 by modeling. So the answer to the question, which is why the vaccine got approved, was that, yes, this is beneficial for our children. We certainly don't want to, as a pediatrician, I never want to do harm. I mean, that's the physician creed. But I do want to protect the kids, and this is one step in protecting them.
Got it. I want to get back to some of the logistical concerns that some folks have. Bo in South Burlington wrote, my 2 kindergartners are needlephobic. If the shots are administered at school, I hope that it can be done outside or in a manner that parents of such children can accompany them during the shot. I imagine a lot of that is going to kind of vary from clinic to clinic, depending on, who's leading it and what the venue is like. But I wonder if you could talk about needlephobia more broadly. How can people kind of set expectations around that?
The rare child, and the parents and I will have talked about it ahead of time, is that we don't do any warning. That's a rare child. I think most children should be prepared that, a vaccine, this is what a vaccine is. There's play kits. They can play and give their parents a pretend shot. They can get a pretend shot at home, treat it pretty matter-of-factly. This is going to help you stay healthy. For some of my kids, I even say, I'm pretty sure that your sister pulls your hair harder than this is going to feel. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. But I can't speak to the school-based clinics. We're not having them down here in Bennington because the hospital has their clinic set up. But I would expect that parents would be allowed to be there. They're going to, try to do what's best for the child. Certainly no child is going to be given the vaccine without parental consent. So if parents have worries that they're sending their child to school and it's a vaccine day and they didn't want to have the vaccine, no worries, your child won't get the vaccine. It needs to have parental consent. There's lots of different places to get the vaccine in the state. For us here in Bennington, the Southwestern Vermont Medical Center at the old Southern Vermont College has the gymnasium set up for COVID testing and COVID vaccines, and parents can accompany. There's a few pharmacies in the state that are giving vaccines. And then the rollout will be coming to almost all the pediatric offices. I'm hopeful that by next Thursday afternoon, I will have a small amount of vaccine to be able to run the COVID parking lot clinic, as I'm calling it, that we have set up on the 19th. There's a lot of practices that, since COVID, our way of practicing has changed. So many practices have been doing parking lot clinics. Even our routine vaccines, if it's a vaccine only visit, my nurse or I go out to the car to give the vaccines. We started that with the flu vaccine last year. It was successful. Parents asked me, hey, you doing that again? Because man, that was quick. That was easy. The kids were less stressed. I noticed that the kids were less stressed. They weren't sitting in the waiting room waiting to be called back. They could have their music playing or whatever. For the littles that were getting the flu vaccine, they're kind of strapped into their car seats, so they're easier to hold. But we did whatever, needed to be done for the kiddos. Some kids wanted to sit on the tailgate of the pickup truck. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm game for anything. So we're going to do the same thing with COVID. I believe that a lot of the other pediatric practices in the state will kind of do something similar, or they may have designated rooms in their offices for that. But eventually it will, we'll have a robust enough supply. But in this first month, it may be, you get it where you can get it. But certainly we always want the parent support. And again, treat it, kids will pick up on your anxiety. So if you can stay calm about it, and try not to, I remember my arm got so sore. If you tell them their arm is going to get really sore, their arm is going to get really sore. If you kind of present this is really no big deal. It's okay. If your arm gets sore, we'll give you a little Tylenol. Don't worry about it. We can put a cold cloth on it. You'll get a cool Band-Aid and all's good.
And I should probably also put in a plug for, as we're talking about the variety of places where you can get it, the website, if people are interested, is healthvermont.gov/kids vaccine. That's where you can kind of look up. There's a map that has all the different locations where clinics are going to be, which pharmacies are giving it out. One other kind of, or a couple more logistical questions. Erica from Rochester asks, what if my child is asymptomatically positive for COVID and I don't know it, and they receive a COVID vaccine? Is it suggested to test children ages 5 to 11 immediately prior to receiving the vaccine?
No, testing beforehand is not recommended. The only thing that we're screening for, if they've had, within the day before, a fever, a cough, a runny nose, so symptomatic potential COVID on any other number of cold viruses, then we would postpone the vaccine. We would test for COVID. Generally vaccines are held not for runny noses, although in the case of COVID, we'd want to test to make sure that runny nose was not COVID. But generally, all vaccines are held if a child is febrile. and until that fever illness goes away, because the immune system needs to deal with the fever illness and not have to work to prime the body for whatever disease we're protecting against. So no testing. If you know that there's been a known exposure, then certainly go ahead and get tested per protocols. If there's questions about timing of testing, you certainly can call their primary care provider and they'll be able to walk them through.
Another one about tests after getting the shot. Libby from Randolph wrote, will getting vaccinated result in a positive PCR test if it's taken shortly after receiving the shot? My son is scheduled to get his jab right before he has to take a COVID test at school. I don't want to reschedule the vaccine appointment or have the test result in him missing more school. Does that make sense?
Yes. And that's a great question. But because the vaccine isn't actually giving you COVID, you're not going to test positive. The PCR test picks up for viral particles in your nose. So all the shot does, the vaccine is again, put the blueprint in there for the immune system to build proteins or antibodies to protect against the actual virus, but it doesn't. It's not in your saliva, it's not in your tears, it's not in your urine, it's not in your nose. So you can't, unless you actually have been exposed to COVID and are positive for COVID, you will not test positive on a PCR. So keep that scheduled appointment. It's okay.
Good. A couple more kind of looking forward. Shailene in East Montpelier writes, will kids 5 to 11 need boosters after their original 2 shots? When my daughter turns 12 in less than a year, will she need another shot then?
No, for right now, because the only ones that boosters are recommended for are 18 above, and then there's certain subsets within that 18 and above. So right now for the under 18 population, it's because only Pfizer's been approved so far, it's only 2 shots. If you're 11 years and 10 months and getting the vaccine this month, 11 years and 11 months and a week and getting the vaccine, say this week, you would get the 5 to 11 dose. Your booster dose, because your child now has turned 12, will be the adult dosage, the 12 and above dose. So it's whatever age your child is the type of vaccine that you would get. If you get both doses because you're under 11, you're good to go. There's not any boosters. That will be what will be determined in the long-term studies and surveillance, which is, why adults are now getting some boosters, healthcare workers, elderly, high-risk individuals, because, again, our immune system is not as robust and just needs to be reprimed so that we can, be further protected, along with all the other mitigation measures that we've been doing.
One more kind of looking ahead, JR, I don't know where JR is from, but JR asks, what is the timeline for kids under 5? When Pfizer submitted data to the FDA on 5 to 11-year-olds in September, I think they said data on 2 to 4s was just a few weeks behind, but I've heard nothing since. What do we know?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I know it's in the works. Probably the 2 to 5, 2 to less than 5 group will be the one that will be rolled out next. I mean, they are studying for 6 months to 2 years also. I think the timeline is going to be a little bit later. So sometime in 2022 for that 2 to 5 year group. I get a lot of parent questions on that one too, because certainly it would make the logistics of childcare a whole lot easier for parents also, particularly since that age group tends to have lots of runny noses and vomiting and, any number of things. And the question, which is one of the things that has made practicing pediatrics so much more difficult and fatiguing for all of us, is that every single question that comes in about a runny nose, or somebody threw up, or someone has diarrhea, oh, do we need to test for COVID? What's the exposure? What's the risk? So we have to think about every single encounter instead of just like, oh, they're feeling fine, they're bouncing around, they have a little runny nose, no big deal. It is a big deal if it's COVID, because one, we want to know to be able to monitor that child, but we also don't want them spreading to something else. So, to be honest, I can't wait also until that 2 to 5 group. But I expect it's probably not going to be, probably more towards spring with things.
Okay.
And again, it's trying to find the right dose for them.
Okay. Do you think it's likely that'll be even less than that 10 micrograms that they landed on for this group?
It probably will be less than that. Yes.
Gotcha. Well, I know we're coming up on our time limit here. I'm hoping we can squeeze in maybe just a couple last questions from some of our live viewers tonight. One of them, Jenna, who's watching live, and thank you for tuning in. She asked, and just to kind of bring this back to some of what we were talking about up top, is this still considered an experimental shot? And how long will studies go on for?
I think the studies will go on for years, particularly since we've got electronic capabilities. I still get occasional emails of, how are you feeling? Have you had COVID? So just surveillance questions, which are important tracking. So this is not experimental. It was an emergency use authorization, but to get to the emergency use authorization is no different than the full-fledged authorization. So it wasn't pushed through. They had to look at the same data. They had to weigh all the risk benefits. There was no shortcuts. It just that bureaucracy being bureaucracy, if we waited for full use, as you see, how long did it take for the adults to get through to full use instead of offering the emergency use authorization in this crisis of COVID and the millions of deaths worldwide. That's why it circumvented some of the bureaucracy, but not the science and not the rigor of the testing.
And one other thing that again has just kind of come up repeatedly in a lot of these questions, one that specifically has arisen is this question of natural immunity. If so many kids have already contracted COVID, combined with that overall reduced risk of severe impacts to them. Again, this question of why is it still worth doing with this age group with all those factors considered?
So coronavirus COVID is a coronavirus, and it's a cold virus. Why do we get colds multiple times throughout the year? For us in the Northeast, that October to March time is prime time. It's because our body has some immunity, but it doesn't have full immunity to every single cold virus. COVID has proven that it mutates a lot and quickly, and each mutation, it's trying to survive. And so each mutation is a little bit worse than the previous one. There have been people who've gotten COVID a second time around. And again, it's those same risks for nothing may happen, but something might. You might get pneumonia. What if you had RSV or you had strep throat and then you get COVID shortly thereafter? You've had mono and you get COVID shortly thereafter. Your immune system has been pretty taxed, so you may have more severe disease. So to prevent that is a good thing. The other thing is, and this is just based on, because COVID, particularly to transmission to adults, can be so significant and so severe that, and we've thought this on other diseases too, that people have to isolate. They have to stay home from school. Kids miss out on school. They miss out on instructions. Our kids are behind, as the recent data just posted, I think yesterday or today, has shown on the standardized testing. You can argue about what those mean. So we got to keep them in school, keep them in activities. The vaccine is a way to do that. Because if you're vaccinated and you get exposed, you can continue to be in school. You get tested, but you don't have to stay home. I have a family who chose to not vaccinate. The parents got ill. The father actually ended up in the hospital. He's home now. But the kids have been out of school because of the timeline and the rigors of the isolation of who ended isolation, finished their quarantine. Then the kids who've been tested negative, they've been out of school for 6 weeks and out of daycare. Had they not had to go through that, because if they'd been vaccinated, they could have stayed in school. So, it makes a difference for keeping the kids healthy, preventing some severe consequences of the disease, and keeping them in their learning environment, in their social environment, in their sports and activities, which they sorely need. We know with, the COVID shutdown, how it affected all of us, and it impacted the children and their emotional health. And we want to get back to them being fun, loving kids, and not having to stay home and not be with their friends.
Great. Well, I think that maybe that's a good place to leave things for now. Judy, I really appreciate you joining us again and giving us your time tonight, because I know you're very busy as a pediatrician working during this time right now. And so I appreciate you jumping on to talk some of this through with us, and also really appreciate everyone who's tuning in, everyone who sent in questions. This is not the end of the conversation for us. We're going to keep taking your questions, doing our best to answer them in different formats. We'll have Q&As on our site in the coming days about this and about other COVID-related concerns. And so please keep talking to us. We're happy to always hear from you. But thanks again for tuning in. Thank you so much, Judy, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me.
Of course. And everyone can keep an eye on vtdigger.org, and you'll see more about this as the days go on. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Yeah. Bye.